Hey y'all, just wanted to hop in here and kind of give a little explanation into what I might do when it comes to mixing this song. Obviously, you're gonna have other layers on here by the time you start to mix it, but these concepts will apply. So we'll just play the song. This will be the session that you get. Basically, it will look just like this essentially. So right away, bass is a little loud, so that's a volume thing. That's easy. And remember, you can open up this drum kit, and you have control over the kick and the snare volume, the overheads. So definitely, play around with these to your taste as well. It's still a little loud. And honestly, that manly DI sounds really good. So the bass is pretty solid. Wait for these guitars to come in because I know there's definitely gonna be some stuff with them. So I'm gonna pan these right away, left and right. Maybe not hard pan, just slight pan. They're really loud, so we'll turn the volume down. And they're more of a texture than like a, again, I said in class, they're just to make the chorus big or bigger. So we'll go back to that. And so when I was hearing these earlier, they sounded a little muddy. And by muddy, I mean either like low end muddy or like low mids boxy muddy. I kind of use those interchangeably. So we'll just put this channel EQ on. This is just the Logic EQ. And we'll look at what's going on. And so 200 to 300, just in a lot of things, is pretty gross. So we'll cut some of that out and see what that does. And these were definitely the frequencies that I was hearing. So I'll boost it like these kind of overtones. So this low frequency, this is the root. This is the low string root note of the chord. The peaks above that are harmonics that are being created by the instrument. They're often just resonance, and when you make cuts in those ranges, you can really tighten up the sound. This is true in live sound as well. So we'll bring another band in, make it tighter, and it's like in there a little bit, or maybe even closer to 300. And you don't want to do too much because if you take it all out, it'll just sound thin. This is just really to clean up the sound and make the parts that sound good on the guitar stick out. So we'll do a before and after. This is before. And so I just cleaned up, made the guitar stick out a little more. Guitars also can benefit from a low cut or a high pass filter. I usually go fairly steep, maybe 24 decibels per octave. We can talk about what that is in class. And depending on the part, usually up to around 100 hertz, maybe even higher depending on the part, or sometimes lower if it's a heavier genre that needs real chunky guitars. But this, all that stuff below there, that's just rumble, essentially. And I mentioned in instruction notes that guitars can often benefit from high cut as well, low pass filter. And you'll see, let me play this. You'll see the frequency analyzer, there's nothing above like 4K. Some string noise and stuff when there's sliding happening, but even, it's beyond that, there's nothing. So when you're looking at a mic on an amp, which is what this is, what's in that space right now is just air and AC noise from the air conditioner, or electronic hiss and hum from gear, and which is all natural. But in the context of a mix and across multiple tracks like this, especially when you have 40, 50 tracks, something like this can really clean up the mix a lot and make a lot more space. Is just adding a cut like this. And actually, I didn't want to use Fab Filter because not everybody will have that. We have them at the school. They're really good learning tools, though. You can solo the frequency range that you have selected. So let me add this. So it's really hard to hear. But, you know, especially when parts are doubled, stuff really adds up to making just noise in the mix. So that's at about 9K. We'll move it up to 9K. Like it is not missed. It tightens up the sound a lot. Because essentially, that, like I said, that's just air or amp noise or hiss from the preamp or compressor or whatever you had running through it. And so I'll show you the low end too while we're here. So right around 70, we start hearing stuff. And this is 100. This is 10. I tend to go to 100. Because the tendency, I think, for people is when they hear muddiness is to go for the lowest peak they see and try and cut that out. The problem is that's the root of the note. And so when you do that, it starts to sound thin, or it can even throw off the pitch a little bit. And same with these harmonics that we're about to cut. But often I find cutting these harmonics right above the root frequency is a much better approach. It's like right there. Make that a little narrower. And we'll add that cut from the other EQ. You know, like that's just ringing, essentially. So let me turn Pro Q off and go back to Logic EQ. I'll move this up to around 9K. And we will copy and paste this to the double, because the double should be the same part, the same chords, the same. It's a different mic, so we're gonna have to make some we're gonna have to listen and possibly make some adjustments, but it should be a good starting place to just copy and paste that. So let's listen with no EQ first, just to see. So it has some muddiness too. I mean, no matter the mic, usually the guitars have some cleaning up that could be done in the harmonics right around there. So we'll throw that EQ in and just clean it up a little bit. So let's listen to both of them with the EQ, or we'll start without the EQ and then we'll kick the EQ on. And let me just make sure this is going to put both of them on. Excellent. Okay. So this is without EQ. And here's EQ. So it just helps the guitars shine out a little more rather than being like masked in this, it's like a mask. It's kind of how it is visualized in my mind. It's just covering the sound. And it's natural, but you can, some of that's proximity effect from the mic being so close. Some of that's just maybe the amp had a little too much bass turned up on it, you know, stuff like that. Without, with. And you'll notice I didn't boost anything. Like I think some tendency might be also to come in and instead of cutting out this muddiness, because, you know, maybe you'll hear the muddiness, but your tendency might be to boost the high end instead. And we could go in here after we cut out the lows, the low mids a little bit. We could come and boost the high end for sure. I tend to do additive EQ on like channel strip plugins, like especially SSL channel strip plugins for high end. The Waves or UAD. That I have the Waves personally, and it sounds fantastic. Just this high band, you'll recognize this is a very similar console to the one we were at today in class. I just come and start with a 3 dB boost right there. It's set at 8K. I usually don't even change that. This is just for little like color, really, like a little, I don't know, just something. And so we solo just that channel. So we'll do before and after. You know, it's subtle, but it adds a little sweetness to it, especially when it's combined over 2 tracks. So we'll just add that to the other guitar as well. So let's just see what it is sounding like with these slight cuts and filters and this small 3 decibel high-end boost. Turn up the volume a little bit. That's without the plugins right now. With. So immediately that's, you know, it took a minute to explain it, but that ultimately is like 5 minutes of listening and throwing plugins on stuff. And it immediately makes it sound better. There's no compression, that's no reverb, it's nothing. It's just like helping the signal shine. So let's move to bass while we're at it, because once you start cleaning up one track, you're going to start noticing these same kind of problems in other tracks. This low peak, it's the root frequency of the note. And so let me go back. These are overtone harmonics. And these are what we cut out of the guitar. You'll notice these are much more spaced apart. It's because this is he's playing one note at a time on the bass rather than like 6 strings at once on the guitar, you know, with 4 or 3 notes making up each strum basically. So small cut in that range, and we'll do a small cut right above it as well. And by small, you know, I 3 decibel cut is about where I start. So if it's real bad, I'll go for 6, or, you know, I'll cut it in half and go 4.5. I tend to move in 3 decibel movements. So let's just see where we're at. I might cut a little more. So actually, it's around 200 that I'm hearing. I was focused a little too low, so it's those frequencies. So let's see. Yeah. So we'll do with and without. This is without. And with. Make this a little more narrow so it's not cutting out that root note as much. With, without. And so what you should be hearing is the ring. There's like whoo kind of ringing in there that's being cut out. And again, it's easy to go too far when you have it soloed. It's important to reference it in the context of the mix, but I have a feeling this will be just about right. So this is with EQ on the bass. Without. With. So again, it's like uncovering that mask that's over, it's like a veil over the sound. It's just getting rid of that. So bass also, just like guitar, can benefit from a low pass filter. We'll turn this on. And it can even be a little more dramatic than the guitar, depending on the part and the playing style. But typically, same rules apply. We'll go maybe up to 7,500 hertz rather than 9K. Usually it's good to kind of round off around 35 or 40 hertz even, depending on the genre, on kicks and bass guitars, and any bass, truthfully. Especially if you're at home mixing in headphones, it's always safe to just go ahead and do that. You won't really be able to tell in headphones what is being cut out, but if you go to a system with a subwoofer, if you play it in a venue or something, it'll make a huge difference. It's not these are frequencies that just make speakers distort. Essentially, you don't hear anything down there. Where you start to hear stuff is around 35, 40 hertz. So you don't want to go too high up. So I like where the cymbals and snare are at, but the kick feels a little low in the mix now that there's a bass and guitars going. So kick in and kick out. Kick in mics often provide the attack because they're placed inside of the porthole on the kick drum. They're closer to the beater. Kick out is usually a large diaphragm condenser kind of placed on the outside of the kick drum. And what that means is it's going to get more boominess in it. So the way to look at these two mics and how to balance them is that kick in, when you turn it up, is going to give you more slap and attack in the sound, and kick out, when you turn it up, is going to give you more boominess, or vice versa. So it's like even before you hit the EQ on these channels, that's kind of how you can sculpt the sound if there's multiple mics on something. So let's talk about some kick drum EQ. Let's pull up the channel EQ on this. Let me just find where this frequency's at. That clicking that I'm not a fan of is around 2K, 3K, somewhere in there. I think a slight cut in that range can help make it sound a little more natural. So if you look at this frequency analyzer, the tail end of this mound of kick drum sound is like 100 to 200 hertz. There's often just ringing resonance. So same rules apply. Just take a small cut and it tightens it up dramatically. Without EQ, with EQ. And so let's see. Let's do some EQ on the kick out. So that sounds really, really boomy, and next to no attack in it. So yeah, like 50 hertz, 60 hertz. 60 hertz often is the culprit. 40 hertz. And then I think there's an overtone in there as well that might be beneficial to cut out. Right in there. So we'll play without EQ. With. It's very subtle, but again, subtle things combined over the course of many tracks are going to clean up your mix a lot. So let's start building a little balance here. Start at the beginning of this one. Yeah, that's sitting pretty good. Let's pull these guitars in. Go to a chorus. Turn that kick down a hair. We're on drums. Kind of want to talk about the snare top and snare bottom. So in the same kind of fashion as kick, these kind of, you can look at them as blending in different frequency ranges or different kind of characteristics of the drum. So, so snare top is often more of the like low end kind of part of the snare. It's picking up the stick hit. It's picking up most of the tone of the drum itself. Um, and often this is probably the snare sound you're familiar with most. Snare bottom. So this is on the bottom of the snare and it's picking up the snare rattle. So when you blend the scene together, the snare bottom adds kind of some top end. This is snare top only. Hear the snares, the sound of the snares come in there. There's no snare mic, snare bottom only, and together. So often snare top has some ringing in it that can be taken out a little bit. Come here. It's usually in like the 200 to 400 range. It's not the root. That's very important for the body. Sometimes you'll need to make a cut there. It's the overtone. Right there. I'll just make a small cut. So I'll play without EQ and then with. Oh, I'm sorry. So definitely if you had to take it out of the snare top, you'll have to take it out of the overheads in the room. It's actually not too bad. These sound pretty good too. There, it's in the room. Okay. It's like it's somewhere else. Honestly, I might just cut out this whole area right around 180, 200. Actually, I'll make this cut a little more drastic on the snare top mic. Raise the width a little bit and make it a deeper cut. Cool. So briefly, tom mics, there are no toms in this song, I believe. If there are, they can be treated kind of similarly to the kick and snare, just taking out the mask that's covering their sound. They kind of already panned. All of this is panned in drummer perspective, so as if it's panned as if the drummer's sitting at the kit, a right-handed drummer, mind you. So hi-hats on the left, rides on the right, first tom's left, second tom's middle, third tom's right. So hi-hat mic, let's talk about EQ for that. So hi-hats, normally this would have a lot of bleed in it if this was a real drum kit. So you can take a low or a high pass filter and go up somewhere around, safely you can go up to at least 200-300 hertz without affecting too much of the sound. If you go a little bit too higher, you'll start taking away some of the body of the hi-hat, which can be good, but I'm not gonna do that. I like thick hi-hats. It's also important to keep in mind that a lot of the hi-hat sound is coming from the overheads and the room sound, the room mic. This is why it's important to have things panned in one perspective, not all over the place when it's a real drum kit with multiple mics, is because when we're listening to this hi-hat mic, you can hear the hi-hats on the left. So we want our hi-hat mic to be on the same side to aid the sound rather than this starts to, it doesn't outrightly sound bad, but it just starts to get phasey and the imaging gets weird. So it's just good practice to keep your perspective the same, whether it's drummer's perspective or audience perspective. Audience perspective would obviously be if you were in the audience looking at the drummer. So like hi-hat would be on the right, ride would be on the left, etc. For, for a right-handed drummer. Overheads. There's already some EQ happening, it looks like. Oh no, there's nothing. This gain plugin is just to swap the left-right so that it's panned the way we need it to be. This EQ. So overheads often have just a lot of resonance in them because they're like, maybe 3 or 4 feet above the drums. They're getting a lot of the room sound too. So you can hear the kick. Has some muddiness in it, so right in there somewhere. Yeah. Again, often it's not the lowest that you can find. It's usually right above it, the overtones. You gotta, overhead specifically, you gotta check what you're doing in comparison to the whole drum kit sound, because a lot of the sound of drum kits come from the overheads themselves. Turn these snares down a little bit. So I like what that's doing. I'll maybe cut out some of these. Whoops. These frequencies as well. Just 300 to 400 hertz, just boxing it. Like that. Kind of gross stuff in there. So we'll do AB. This is without EQ. And with. So just tighten up the sound. So overheads, you can, if, again, additive EQ, for any of these tracks this applies. I would reach for a channel strip or some kind of analog emulation plugin to add EQ. I tend to do cuts with like FabFilter or this channel strip EQ, but as far as like adding or boosting frequencies, I tend to do those in my channel strip plugins. So finish up drums because this video is getting really long. The room mic, this is like usually a mic that's placed maybe 6 to 12 feet away from the kit or farther depending on the room. So again, just like overheads, there's going to be a lot of resonance. There's already something going on. I guess maybe I did that earlier. So oh yeah, that was from the snare. Sorry, I've had a long day. Actually, I'm gonna just undo a bunch of that. Cool. So, just like the overheads, we're gonna cut out some of this 3 to 400, maybe 200 hertz. Just that gross stuff in there. And it's gonna tighten up the drum kit a lot. Maybe a little higher. And then I'll maybe add because this low end could potentially be causing phase cancellations with the kick mics, because it's like, a mic that's way far off, so it's like physically further away. So sometimes in the context of the overall drum kit sound, it can be beneficial to hear how much that tightened it up. So without EQ, I'm sorry, this is without the high pass filter, the low cut, and with. Let's take it even further up. That might have been too far, honestly. So let's back out and listen to all the instruments. just as far as frequency spectrum is concerned for the mix, that's already sounding a lot better than it was before. So this is with EQ. And then without. With. Cool. So I'll probably this video is getting really long. I'm not going to hit these synth tracks. Same rules apply though. Just look for muddiness and cut that stuff out. And that's a really solid start to a mix. I'm going to start a new video going over compression, and we'll take this even further.